Hi there, welcome to Nomadic Diaries. We're the podcast that takes you on journeys through the lives of those who have already embraced the international lifestyles. Whether you're an expat, a digital nomad, or someone who's dreaming of those lifestyles, this is your passport to a world of insight. We dive deep into the hearts and minds of the overseas lifestyle professionals, the authors, and researchers. Join us in this fun adventure as we deconstruct all the elements of expat and nomadic lifestyles, one captivating story at a time. Hello, everybody, and good morning. Today, it is my pleasure to introduce you to Conor Cunneen. Hi, Conor.
Hey, good morning, good afternoon, whatever time of the day this is going out. Hi, Doreen.
Hi. So now we have an Irishman who is being featured today, an Irishman who's sitting in Chicago being interviewed by a Scottish woman who's sitting in Mexico with an Irish name.
All right. Okay. I'm putting on a bad Irish accent as well. But anyway.
A very bad one. Oh, well,
Yeah.
It's because my Scottish accent is faded.
Yeah. It actually has faded quite a good bit, yeah.
Oh, okay, it has, but people pick up on it. They still, they say, where are you from?
Yeah.
So I want to tell you listeners a little bit about Conor, and he is a humorist. He is a storied speaker, and he talks about humor and how to use it. And he's going to help us today unpack a little bit about how to use humor across borders.
Let's go for it.
Let's do it. So tell me, Conor, you're in Chicago now.
Yeah.
Why did you leave Ireland? Is there a wee story there you can tell us?
There is. I was actually working for a company, and you would well know the brand story. The company was Unilever, and I was VP of marketing with them on the food service side. And the main brand, and I'm sure all of your listeners would be aware of, is Hellmann's. And anyone who's in the Latin Americas or Europe, the other key brand was Knorr. So I was working with them in Ireland and in the UK, and then they transferred me over to the United States. As one of my Irish friends said, "Oh, Conor, you're being transferred over there to mess up the United States now, are you?" So that's how I ended up in the States a few years ago.
And how did you segue to becoming the go-to person to teach us about how to use humor?
Well, my core business and brand now, Doreen, is Irishman Speaks. And the basic mission there is to improve people, performance and productivity with a smile. So primarily, I'm a keynote speaker, a business consultant. But what I do is one of the key vehicles I use to get my message across and to impact the audience positively is by using humor in the presentations. So I would position myself as a motivational speaker who adds humor to leave the audience with a smile in the face, with a spring in the step, and with memorable, actionable takeaways to keep on keeping on during what are often challenging times. So that's the positioning. How I got to it, that's a long story. I'm sure we've got 25 minutes to talk about that. But it wasn't the original goal. But then again, whoever ends up where they are, they think they might end up.
Right. Who lives the lives that they imagined? Because there's a big gap between what we imagine we're going to do and actually what happens in life. Exactly.
Absolutely. I mean, if anyone had said to me 25 years ago when I first came over here to start working on my Chicago accent, nailed that, haven't I? If anyone had said to me in 25 years' time, Conor, you'll be talking to Doreen Cumberford about doing a piece about adding humor to your presentation, I would have said, that's funny. But I wouldn't have believed them, kind of thing.
Yes. So sometimes life turns out so much better than we had imagined, but it's not usually the easy path that gets us there, correct?
That is absolutely true. I have to say now, I am, as you might appreciate, we've had a few other chats previously, I'm a pretty upbeat, happy guy. And almost all of my career, things have gone, I've been happy. I've had one or two setbacks, which I do talk about in my presentations and what I learned from them. But overall, the job I'm doing now as a keynote speaker and facilitator and the brand Irishman Speaks, nothing compares to the job satisfaction that I get from that, from just being able to communicate with audiences, leave them with a smile on the face, and then come off the stage. And I'm smiling because they're smiling, and they've also got good messaging. The job satisfaction is phenomenal. The revenue stream, though, I mean, that can be all over the place, quite honestly.
Yes.
But in terms of just emotional satisfaction and emotional deposits that I've got, this is mind-bogglingly good career.
Yes. And as a guts person originally, I kind of have a heartfelt sense about that, almost an intuition as to how that feels. Because when people talk about your work or anyone's work and that is in that motivational or inspirational field, it just sort of, it physically fills my heart up. Do you get a physical sensation of satisfaction as well?
Oh, most definitely. I mean, I do speak about the power of the neurochemicals we've got in our brain, the dopamine and things like that. So when things go well, it is just not just a mental thing, like, but you can feel as if you can levitate. I'll tell you a story about, people often ask me, what was your most memorable one in terms of keynotes? And my most memorable keynote and presentation was to an Amish community down in Shipshewana in Indiana, just pre-COVID. And my wife said to me, "No, Conor, when you go down, be very, very careful, because you know, Doreen, and any Irish expats who are listening, we drop at the odd profanity now and again." Okay?
Yes, a wee bit.
Even in Ireland, it's done in mixed company regularly. But she said, you need to be very careful. No, I never drop profanities on stage. But also, that I realized I was going into a community that was, I mean this in a positive way, a simple kind of group of people who weren't kind of used to a lot of the electronics in the 21st century, weren't accepting them. So I went down to that and spoke to them on my core keynote, which is titled The Gift of Gab: Goals, Attitude, Behavior. And I was driving back home, texted my wife, phoned my wife, and I said, that was the best reaction I have ever got from an audience. And she said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "I am, yes." Because the way it worked was, you went into that place in Shipshewana, large exhibition hall. The parking lot is full of just horses and buggies.
Buggies, yeah.
Absolutely. It was amazing. I mean, I got photographs of it. I go into the exhibition, and when I'm doing the opening keynote, all of the Amish community troop in, the dads, the mothers, and they've got kids sitting on their laps. Yes. And the stories I was telling, I made sure I kept them very, very appropriate. Jokes or little anecdotes that I know would always get a good reaction from a regular audience. They just exploded, and the laughter kept going and going and going. And I was on stage, like the physical reaction you were saying, I was saying, this is incredible. It really is. And it was just so self-affirming to see so many people smiling and laughing because it was a business presentation I was doing. They're wonderful business people, but just the reaction. I came off that stage, I could have been on drugs. I wasn't, but I could have been.
You were high.
Yeah.
Well, I would suggest that what you were doing there was you were crossing cultures.
Yeah.
And we speak a lot in this Nomadic Diaries about cultural competencies, about cultural intelligence, which is our individual measurement of how intelligent we are.
Yeah.
And that was very intelligent of your wife to bring that to the forefront, to be aware that you were crossing into a different culture. And thirdly, cross-cultural communication.
Absolutely.
And so you were doing all of those quite naturally, as you seem to. Now, I have a question about that. Do you use your experiences as a migrant as an example of crossing cultures with humor? Do you talk about that in your talks a lot? I mean, it sounds like you have lots of anecdotes, lots of stories. But do you ever talk about the sort of the hard parts of it?
I do, but I try to do it in a kind of a humorous way. I mean, you probably are the same experience, and I think most expats probably have gone through the same kind of experience. We came over to the States 25 years ago. We had visited the States on a number of occasions, and it was just a wonderful country to visit, etc. And people seem to be so friendly and offering you a have a nice day kind of thing. And you thought this was brilliant. Then we come over and we start living here. And it is tough. It really is tough. It's tougher for the spouse. And I'm sure a lot of spouses are probably nodding here now in agreement. Because when I came in here, I was working with a good group of guys. And I used to leave at 7 o'clock in the morning, go to work, etc. My wife did not have any kind of a work visa at that stage. So she was kind of just rattling around the house kind of thing. Our daughter was 14 years of age. And this wonderful dad dragged my daughter over to the States and dumped her into a high school at Christmas time in freshman year.
Oh,
I mean,
my.
DCFS or child endangerment should have been on my neck kind of thing for that. But she's absolutely blossomed and has a wonderful career here now in America. But it was really tough on her. It was
Yes.
really tough on my wife, who did not really want to come over kind of thing. It was hesitant about that. So that took a bit of time to get used to. And what I found was that the American system really does appreciate the Irish brogue down, the Irish attitude, and is very, very welcoming for us in that sense. But we did have some challenges. I'll tell you one funny story. We are now US citizens, joint citizenship, though. I always put my Irish passport up first in preference, obviously.
Me too.
Yeah. You've got an Irish passport, Doreen?
No, I have a British passport, but my American husband has an Irish passport.
Right. Yeah. So you go into Ireland to the Irish immigration and you show your Irish passport as you walk in, so you don't ever get stuck in the line for non-EU. We went through all of the rigmaroles of getting your US citizenship. The last interview that we did, we had to go downtown Chicago. I live just outside of Chicago. And as I said, we went into confessional boxes where the immigration officer kind of then asks you for your sins, etc.
Yes.
I came out. Pat then went in. She comes out a few minutes later. And I said, how did it go? And she had a kind of concerned look on her face. And she said, do you know the question I was asked? And I said, no, Pet. What question were you asked? She said, I was asked, are you or have you ever been a prostitute?
Oh, my goodness.
That was my reaction as well. So what I said to her was, how do they know? Good supporting husband here, haven't I? So I actually, Pat then went to work. She was working in a school. She went into the school. They said she got her visa and things like that, and told her friends about what had happened. And one of her supportive friends said to her, Pat, your previous work history should have no implications on whether or not you get US citizenship or not. So that's the kind of support we got there.
Yes.
But that was just one example, like, about how, I mean, it's funny now, but when she was asked that question, like, she was totally taken aback by it. Other simple little things. Just getting a bank account when we came over here first.
Yes.
Getting credit cards. Mind-boggling how difficult it was.
Yes.
Getting a landline, remember when people used to have phones with landlines?
Oh, yes.
Getting one of those.
Attached to the wall. Yes.
Yeah, it was so difficult. So the surprising thing, I think, is how surprised we were and how difficult it was to acclimate to a society that I thought we knew from watching television and from being over here on vacation on a few other occasions. So emigrating and getting into a new society is challenging, even when the language is basically the same.
Yes, it's very challenging. And I would postulate that you and I have a level of white privilege at our backs. We are not like a lot of other migrants in some respects, because I think there's a little bit of, you speak the language, number one, and that's a blessing. Your race, maybe age, maybe education, all of these things play a role. And so for many migrants, they don't have the same experience. And I just want to acknowledge that my privilege and the ability to be a US citizen. I've been very, very blessed by that in many respects.
I completely agree with you with that. I mean, the fact that we're white, let's be blunt about we're white,
we are
Irish brogue, etc. It makes it a lot easier for me than some poor Hispanic person that might be coming up from Mexico, legal or illegal, because I think the challenges that they have got are just so much worse than anything that we have gone through.
Yes. Now, I was going to ask you, what did you find funny about the US? And you just told me a story about that. So what do you find funny about Ireland now that you've lived in the US for 25 years and you look back at Ireland? What do you find funny about that?
Well, I'll tell you, I'll answer it a different way first.
Okay.
What I miss about Ireland is the funny.
Me too. Me too.
Absolutely. I mean, that's what my wife always says. She says the one thing I miss from Ireland is the laughter. Because
me too.
To any social situation in Ireland, into a pub or into a coffee shop, and there's a vibrancy and there's a laughter and a camaraderie there that you can just feel and smell. And you do not get that generally here in the United States. So one of the comments I often make when I'm speaking to audiences, Doreen, is I tell people that I'll be talking to an audience, was doing it in Las Vegas the other day, and I was speaking to the audience, and I said, the thing I really miss from Ireland is that Ireland has got the best crack in the world, okay?
I've heard this.
You know where I'm going, kind of, people and what I actually say is, what, did that guy, Irish guy, actually say Ireland has got great crack? And I said, let me explain. In the Irish vernacular, crack is the Irish word for fun or for having a great time.
Yes.
So it would not be unusual for you, if you were in Ireland, to hear someone say like, oh, Sister Margaret, we had amazing crack down at the parish priest's house last night, kind of thing. Okay? So that's the way I introduce the word crack to the American population. It's a word that people are becoming more familiar with here, I think, now. But,
yes, they are. But it's important to work on those little translations. And that's one of the things that I want to make a value and a high value proposition on Nomadic Diaries is I want people to hear laughter and fun and a sense of hugging across the airways. It's like, I want to hug the audience through the microphone. And I think that podcasting is a very intimate experience because we are in people's ears. We're in their physical, and there's a responsibility there. But there's also a sense of how can we bring some joy and plant some joy in some ears? And I think you do that by all the fun that you are reteaching and retooling people to revisit.
Yeah, most definitely. And the thing I find interesting about podcasts is that we actually listen to podcasts. And by that, I mean, you turn on the radio in your car and you're not really listening to it. It's on, but you're not listening to it. Yes. But podcasts, though, we take a deliberate decision to actually listen to them. And in that sense, it is a really powerful communication and messaging vehicle in this environment.
Yes, it is. And I am just so excited to have you on. I wonder if you can tell me a little bit about how you use humor or how you talk to people about using humor across these cultures, because sometimes my humor goes over and sometimes it doesn't. It just lands like a thud. They look at me really weirdly. But I consider myself as a very natural product of growing up in Scotland, was just finding the funny in everything. And I, like you, miss that. So how do you teach people to sort of get across that place where some things are not funny anymore?
Right. In today's environment, it definitely is a challenge. And you know what? I'm going to mention Donald Trump here now for a second, okay? I know that might frighten you, but some of our listeners, but then some of your listeners will be delighted with it. But I want to just show the way the Trump view changed over the years. So when I'm presenting to audiences, I often talk about, let's say I want to bring a little bit of humor. I tell people, you should read a lot of books, kind of thing, because just be curious and be interested. And I used to say before Trump became a political animal at all, I would say that, for instance, I was reading Donald Trump's autobiography last night, which is titled, Now That I'm Humble, I'm Perfect. Okay? So in 2013, 2014, 2015, that used to get laughter right across the whole audience. As he became serious as a political candidate, you began to see that, a few people don't really like this. And then after another couple of months, as it became really serious, I started getting heckled because I was making comments about Donald Trump. So it was just an interesting lesson on how the humor that's appropriate on one occasion can just become detrimental after a while. And I do remember one occasion, I presented to a large medical sales conference here in the Chicagoland area. I told that story about Trump and the little book that I was reading, and some guy heckled me and he says, why don't you say something about Hillary Clinton? So I had something in my back pocket and I said, this is going to be a balanced interview now, Doreen, okay? I said, yeah, I was reading Hillary Clinton's book last night, 78 Ways to Be Authentic. Okay? So, I said, I'm an equal opportunity offender, but I keep away from any political references normally. I'm only explaining those on this podcast to explain the challenges and the dangers of using politics. And we all know what it's like here in the States.
Yes.
Friendships have just been riveted apart.
Yes, yes, we've all experienced pain over this, and it really is an intercultural. It's a perspectives. It's we're all looking at it from a different point of view, and we all seeing through different glasses and different lenses. So it is tough. I would just like to add that I must say, Trump's mother was Scottish.
Yeah.
And I sometimes get a hint of that wit or that old wit that he used to have, like calling people names, right?
Yeah.
When I grew up in Scotland, little kids on the playground did that. They came up with funny names for people. And I go like, that is just classic Scotland. I just think that he's taken us all somewhere where we really don't, some of us don't want to go.
Right. Yeah.
with the humor, because it's not funny. And I do think he has a great sense of imagination. Now, I'm not a huge fan, but he has a great sense of imagination. I was reading a list of all the mistaken words and what he does with words. And I think that is creativity. And that is kind of a Scottish trait as well. I can remember kids at school take a word and make different words out of it.
Right.
And so I think that sometimes we have to sit back and go, where is this coming from? And how do I internalize it? But then how do I speak words that are healing? How do I make humor always a healing and a positive source of goodness? So I think that you are just doing great work in the world, and the world really needs this kind of work right now. So from your perspective, has the pandemic changed our sense of humor?
That's a good question. And I really don't know the answer to that. It's probably changed the way that we present humor sometimes. So, for instance, I used to do some virtual conferencing before the pandemic, but I'm doing a lot more now. And sometimes it can be difficult to know whether or not your good comments and then presented via some humorous kind of anecdotes, whether they work or not. The advantage I've got, Doreen, is that when I speak to speakers about adding humor to their presentation, one of the questions I do ask them is, all right, you're doing a keynote. Do you know how many times before you do the keynote, the audience is going to laugh? And people kind of go, whoa, I never thought of it that way. But I do think that if you want to use appropriate humor in your presentation, you need to plan it in the presentation. So the point there is that when I'm doing virtual presentations now, and I don't really know what the audience is, how the audience is reacting, or a lot of the cameras are turned off, I do know when I make a humorous line that I'm going to get a reaction at the other end of the camera, and I can leave them just soak in that humor and laughter just for a few seconds, etc. So for me, the pandemic has forced me to change some of the ways I present the humor. I honestly can't say whether or not people's view on humor has changed since the pandemic. That's a really good question. I might do some thinking about that.
Also, one of the things that I talk about a lot is when we move, like when you relocate, and I'm currently in the midst of finishing a book on repatriation, which is going home.
Right.
And I talk about that as a recovery process. And when you are traveling, I don't think we have one suitcase. I think we have two suitcases. One suitcase is your stuff. The other suitcase is our mindset. And, it's got our imagination and our memories and our perspective and our intuition and all of that.
Yeah.
And so what would you say to people about unpacking your sense of humor in a new location?
The first thing I would say is you probably need to be careful because you don't know what way you might go wrong with something. I mean, words that might be humorous in one environment could actually be offensive in another environment. I think when you're speaking the Middle East or places like that, you've got to be even more careful because you can really land yourself in trouble there. So I think that what you need to do, and I wouldn't say, no, I did this well at the start, is that I came in, I was a high-powered exec, I'm an easy guy to work with, I think, and I think all the people who work with me, no, 94% of the people who worked with me would say that, I think. But what I thought originally was that my style is suitable for everyone, but it actually isn't. I mean, a simple little example on this was that When I was in Europe, I was working in Dublin initially, and then I got transferred over to handle the UK and Ireland business. So I used to leave Dublin on Monday morning, fly into Heathrow, and spend the week in Heathrow or in London at Esher, and then come back on Thursday or Friday. What I found interesting, Doreen, was that I come over on Monday morning, go into a meeting, and realize after a few minutes, eyes were glazing over, and people hadn't a clue what the Irish guy was saying because I was speaking so fast. So by Thursday, I'm speaking slowly and things are going fine. I go back to Ireland, and then I realize everyone is speaking at 100 miles an hour. Although actually in Ireland, no, it'd be kilometers. So it'd be 160 miles per hour, 160 kilometers per hour. And people are thinking, Conor, you're speaking so slowly. Have you had a stroke or something like that? But I mean, that was just kind of the simple little difference there with just in the way and the pattern of your speech that can be a challenge. And what I found was that the English really did appreciate Irish humour. The US do, but the Irish humour and Scottish humour and English humour is a bit more profane, I think, sometimes than what Americans in normal civilized situations are used to.
Yes. Can I share a wee story? I know I'm supposed to be asking the questions. But
or we keep it between ourselves, okay?
Don't tell the listeners, okay? A couple of weeks ago, I went to a St. Patrick's Day at Kenny's pub here in San Miguel de Allende, and there was bagpipers. There was 2 bagpipers and several drummers. Right. And the senior drummer had just he'd played for the Queen many times and played for her up until very close to her death, actually. But anyway, he lives in Querétaro, and we're developing a friendship. And it was so lovely because there were 2 other people who were kind of groupies of this Scottish band.
Right.
And we all got together, took a picture, and they all grew up within 20 to 30 miles of my hometown, Largs, in Scotland. And I can't tell you how fun it was. And they were giving me a hard time about my American accent. And I was trying to bring out my Scottish accent. And they said, that doesn't work.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
But, it was just a moment of sort of going back to our cultures. And when you think about the number of people in America who are immigrants and all across the world, we have, 220 million just simple, straightforward corporate expats. And there's probably the same amount of people who are in other fields or other communities in the travel world, right?
Yeah.
And when you think about us all crossing cultures and trying to find a global-hearted perspective, it doesn't work for everybody. We're going to find that these hard parts, right?
Yeah, well, I think everyone has got challenges when they change. I mean, you go from, even here in the States, if you go from living in Chicago to living in, let's say, Little Rock, Arkansas, the cultural differences are astonishing. They might actually be even more difficult than from someone going from Chicago over to London or to Dublin. So it's not just transnational, it's kind of within national as well, a lot of the time that these cultural challenges can occur.
Yes. So it's important to unpack your humor.
Yeah.
And so you gave us one example, and that is watching the pace of the talk, paying attention to what's important in your audience, and checking out the language. Yeah,
absolutely. And what I do say when it comes to humor, Doreen, is that I do a program on adding humor to your presentation, a specific one, separate to the business topics I do on leadership and vision and marketing, etc. But what I do say is you got to remember and believe that you don't have to be humorous to be humorous, or you don't have to be funny to be funny. And people say, what do you mean? I say, just capture the humor around you. Take a note of it. Put it into your iPhone notes or into a notepad or something like that. Decide, I'm going to add some humor to my presentation. So to do that, I want to capture the humor around me. And over the next week or two, if you try and capture some humorous incidents, or get a text from someone that's funny, or you see a cartoon or an image, be careful on copyright, obviously, capture that, put it into your folder, and sometime, somewhere, you will be able to use that kind of anecdote or that little newspaper headline that will be appropriate for your presentation. Put that up on the slide if you're using a PowerPoint and say, all right, I gave you one idea or one thought on leadership. This slide here possibly suggests something different, etc. And what you're doing is you're making the audience laugh. The dopamine is kicking in. They're feeling better. You're more connected. And what have you done? You haven't created the humor. You've simply captured the humor. And that is the simplest way for any of your listeners to be able to add humor to the presentation. You don't have to create it, capture it.
So, audience, I just want to draw your attention to this. This is magical words. You don't have to capture the humor. You have to draw your audience's attention to it in order to see what makes us laugh and what is really funny. It's usually simple things, right?
Absolutely. And the question I regularly put to the audience is, on average, the adult apparently laughs about or smiles 15 to 20 times a day. If you go back and try and audit the 15 or 20 times that you laughed or smiled yesterday, probably none of them related to jokes.
Yes.
They're related to anecdotes, quips, comments, etc. And they're the things that you can capture, bring into your presentation, bring into your communication. If you're doing sales calls, if you can get your client to laugh once or twice in an appropriate manner, you are well on the way to closing that sales.
So this is gold, ladies and gentlemen of the listeners, and thank you so much for this, Conor. Now, in closing, I have 3 short questions for you. If you were on a desert island and you could only take one dish with you, we're playing desert island dish here. If you can only take one dish from the place that you're currently living, what would that have to be?
From the place that I'm currently living in Chicago, is what you're saying, yes?
Yes, yes.
Oh, sweet Lord. Probably, no, we'll go for fish and chips, okay? Because we'll be able to get more fish on the island, probably. We may not be able to get the chips, but good fish and chips, which are difficult enough to get here in Chicago area compared to Ireland or UK. But it's a nice dish, and it probably reminds me of home a little bit.
Oh, that's great. And the second question is, what one superpower, expat superpower or humor superpower, do you think you would like to pack with you?
Make people feel appreciated and believe in themselves.
Appreciation. That's lovely.
Yeah.
And finally, what do you think the world needs now?
Who was it saying that the world needs love? Probably, I mean, without getting anyway simplistic on it, but we do need more of that, I think. And I'll go back to the second one. I think if we, as people in general, appreciate others, compliment them, you're going to create a better work environment. I speak a lot about that in my groups. The power of a compliment is dramatic. Yes. It's going to make you feel better because you make someone else feel better. It makes someone else feel better because you complimented them. And it's a powerful tool in leadership, in family, in community. And the more we could do that on a genuine basis, the better we would have a community and an environment, I think.
Excellent. These words are just gold. Now, tell us, Conor, where can people find you?
Right. The brand is Irishman Speaks. How did he get that? Yeah. So Irishman Speaks, all one word. And the YouTube channel is Irishman Speaks, website Irishman Speaks, etc. I'm on Instagram and TikTok as well with the same kind of thing. LinkedIn and Facebook also. So we just kind of work on the Irishman Speaks brand, then bring the content appropriate to each audience with a little bit of daft Irish humor thrown in as well. So that's probably the best way to connect with me. LinkedIn. And by the way, this is another thing that drives me crazy about the United States. Conor is spelled with one N.
N, yes.
My parents could not afford 2 N's back in Ireland. But America being a rich society, every Conor has got 2 N's. So I'm going to create a website sometime, Doreen, that says conor1n.com.
That's terrific. Well, on that humorous note, I just have to say thank you so much for this time spent together. And listeners, if you would please like, share, and rate Nomadic Diaries, but especially look for Irishman Speaks, and we will be adding all of that to the show notes. Goodbye, everyone.